Hey, what's up you guys? Welcome back to the channel. I'm Chris, as usual, super happy to see you here. Today we'll be talking about Palantir. They just reported their Q3 earnings yesterday, so we got a lot of new information to dig into. So with no further ado, let's jump right into it. Now, if you've watched some of my previous videos or if you're even subscribed to the channel, you probably know that I'm invested in Palantir. I am quite bullish on Palantir. I think it's a good company. I haven't given up my hope on the company yet. So I'm continuing to hold my position. I'm obviously down, the situation, like the stock price has dropped immensely in the last 2 years. So I think most investors are down in their position. So am I, but I'm not worried about it too much at the moment. So with that said, let's jump over into the Q3. That's the first thing I want to discuss today. And then the second thing is I want to show you guys something that Palantir is actually hiding. Because looking at the Q3, we don't actually get the whole picture. And I believe Palantir is hiding that to make, their performance actually look better. So I'm going to show you something in the second part of the video. And then in the third part, I'm going to give you my personal opinion to what to do with Palantir at the moment. And we're also going to look a little bit into the political environment that Palantir is in right now. So we'll be doing those three things, and I'm going to try to keep the video short. If you guys like short videos with that very compact information, then please subscribe to the channel, hit that like button, and let me know what stock you'd like to review next. Alright, so in front of me, I have the Q3 of 2022. It's the business update, so it's a quarterly report. And as I mentioned, it just came out yesterday. It's brand new. I just dug into it a little bit to, also get myself updated, and I want to share that with you guys now. Looking into the highlights, we can see that we had growth of 22% year over year to 478 million US dollars, which I think is decent growth year over year. The macroeconomic environment is not really fantastic at the moment. So seeing a company still growing 22%, in my opinion, is not very bad. Now, most of that growth is actually coming from the US. So we got 31% growth in the US, and especially from the US commercial revenue. And if you've watched my previous videos on Palantir, I always mention that I think the commercial sector is where Palantir is going to grow, because I think the military sector is somewhat limited. Obviously, those are huge budgets, right? But they're somewhat limited in how big Palantir can grow. Also, even if Palantir is the best system available, the US government won't 100% rely on Palantir. So they will always have different contractors for, operational security if something happens, whatever. They have alternatives. Customer count has also increased 66% year over year. So they're at the moment having 337 customers worldwide, which is obviously a good jump. But again, stick with me. Later, I'm going to show you some other numbers. All that growth, of course, is fantastic, but we still need to keep an eye on our margins. And we see that our gross margins are slightly coming down from 82, 83% at its peak down to around 80%. So they're dropping slightly, but I guess it has to do also a lot with the crazy inflation that we have at the moment. Equipment is getting more expensive, and also labor, of course, is getting more expensive. So I think it has to do with that. But even for a tech company and a software company, 80% gross margins are still ridiculously high. So that is definitely also good to see. Another thing that I would like to point out here is that Palantir has absolutely no cash, which is just fabulous. I love to see that. It doesn't look like they have to, raise money with those high interest rates now. So it's really, really good. Zero debt, and they still have 2.5 billion US dollars in cash. So, fantastic company. It's still going to be afloat for a while. They do have some, cash burn. Of course, they're not profitable yet, but I do see that with 2.5 billion, they can survive for a long time to come. Now, their full year guidance actually for 2022 comes in at almost 2 billion US dollars. That is great, but remember, from Palantir's side, they have estimated their revenue in 2025 to be 4.5 billion US dollars. So that is more than a double in two or three more years. So that's roughly like 35% compounded annual growth rate over the next few years. And I think that's going to be really, really difficult. And looking at the, Q4, they actually mentioned they will grow by 16% only to 500 to 505 million US dollars for the next quarter. So that's roughly, a 16% growth rate, but we would have to grow at around 30 to 35% to reach our 2025 target. And that seems really difficult. I mean, only time will tell, obviously. But hopefully, I mean, for me, I'm personally invested in this company. I hope they can reach that target, but I don't see that happening at the moment. So I think there will be probably continuous pain for Palantir coming ahead. And I think the stock price might continue to stay a little bit suppressed. Alright, so that was a quick insight into the Q3 of 2022. Now let's jump over to our second point, the one thing that Palantir is hiding from you. Now, all of the numbers that I showed you in that videos and all the numbers that Palantir put into their Q3 are year-over-year growth. And what happens is that they show you year-over-year growth because they don't want to show you the quarter-over-quarter growth. Because quarter-over-quarter, they have performed very, very poorly. Now, obviously, if we compare numbers from 3 or 4 quarters ago to this quarter, we're going to have a much better growth rate than last 3 months to this 3 months, right? So I'm going to show you the Q2 of 2022 and compare it with the Q3 now. Alright, let's have a look. So in the Q3, so just now, they've reported revenue of 478 million US dollars. And last quarter in the Q2, they reported 473 million US dollars. So from last quarter to this quarter, they have grown by about 1%. So they're literally flat. There's no growth anymore. Of course, year over year, there's growth. That's why they're showing you those numbers. But quarter over quarter, they're flat. They've earned 1% more than they did last quarter. So really, that's very, very bad. Also, look at this. They're talking about a customer count increase of 66%. It's true year over year, but comparing it quarter over quarter, if we look at that, they already had 304 customers last quarter, so now they have 337. So quarter over quarter, they've grown like 10% of customers. So not as much as they're trying to make it look like. And that worries me a bit because personally, I would prefer that they would just openly lay out what happened and how the numbers are, right? They don't really have to hide it. I don't really mind that much, but just lay it out clearly, right? So that people can see it easily. So of course, on those news, the stock has dropped. We're down roughly 10 or 11% yesterday. So of course, it's painful for you guys who are invested in there and me. But actually, on revenue, the company has beat consensus. On operating income, also, we have beat consensus. And on operating income as well, we have actually beaten consensus. But there are a few key points, of course, that were really, really bad, especially what I just talked about. The quarter over quarter growth is flat. There's a general slowdown in growth. So, investors, of course, are punishing the company here. Now, the last point I'd like to talk about is, of course, the political environment, right? Palantir is really very, very dependent on that political environment. And we see that Peter Thiel, actually, he mentioned that with the current administration, so with Democrats in the White House, they are getting less and less contracts. So they're struggling much more for the government business than they did under the Republicans, so under Trump. With the Trump government or Trump administration, revenues were much easier to create from the government. So the Trump administration actually really encouraged that business, and they started to purchase more services from Palantir than what the Biden administration is doing now. And I think generally that's what we see throughout the board when we talk about defense stocks, right? So if we categorize, let's say, Palantir as a defense contractor, as a defense stock, actually it does absolutely make sense. And I do think that a lot depends with Palantir on the geopolitical situation, also outside of America. So not only the political situation in America with Democrats or Republicans, but actually also with what's happening, with Russia and Ukraine, what's happening in Europe in general, right? What's happening with Taiwan and China now. So how America is going to get involved into all of those, geopolitical problems. And I think that's going to really be a key factor for Palantir. They say also that their European business is not that good because Europe is more conservative. They prefer to work with, let's say, the known systems that they already have. Whereas America, and that's why they have more growth there, is open to try new things and to try new systems to see how they actually work. So in general, I think Palantir is really focused on the US. I don't think that Europe is going to be very important for Palantir in the future. I think it's all about the US, how the US is going to do, and how the geopolitics are going to play out. So that's it for me for today. If you guys enjoyed the video, subscribe, click the like button, and I'll see you next time. Thanks.